Hey, everybody. We got a special guest this week. This week we have with us Keidra Chaney. Keidra has taught at Northwestern University around analytics, one of the first classes of its kind, and basically what she does for a living. Well, Keidra, why don't you just go ahead and explain it? Tell everybody who you are and let us know a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. I'm Keidra Chaney. I have been doing digital analytics for about the past 7 years. My job is to do digital strategy. I mostly work for agencies, for startups, for nonprofits, and I help them use digital analytics to help them understand their audience and understand the traffic that comes to their websites and how they can best utilize it. I kind of fell into analytics. I am a journalist and a communications person by training, and I always kind of had technical and analytic skills in my back pocket that I never really used, and I just kind of fell into web analytics in about 2007 when I realized it was an actual job and you could get paid for it, because I used to do it for free for my companies as a way of it was really more of a cover your ass kind of CYA kind of thing, where I would use analytics to justify or to back up decisions that I felt like they needed to be made for the website. So so basically my cover your ass things became a job, and I've been doing digital analytics for the past 7 years for companies. And I also run a blog, and I write, and most of my job and my work revolves around the digital realm and hoping to connect content with audiences.
Right. So, Oz, do you want to jump in?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So Keidra, Oz runs a blog. Jordan runs a blog. I run a blog. And a lot of the people, almost everybody we've had on so far either runs a blog, runs a training site, runs a forum, or has some sort of a presence online. What should we know about our analytics that would help us run a better business online?
Yeah. In doing analytics, one of the things that immediately becomes apparent I work for big businesses, I work for small companies, and one of the things that is common among all of them is that most companies use about 10% of what they could for web analytics. So there's so much functionality that's available for Google Analytics, and for the most part, bloggers kind of plug and play. You put in the JavaScript code, you get in the traffic information, you look at the traffic information, and that's pretty much it. There's no contextualization of the data. There's no kind of looking at trends. And that's really the real value of analytics comes from looking at trends and from looking at these data points, not in isolation, but the story that they tell when you look at them together. So one of the things that it's like a personal pet peeve of mine, but whenever somebody refers to their traffic as hits, I shudder a bit because it's not an accurate term. It's an antiquated term. It's a term that's completely not relevant to the actual data points that are being collected. Usually when people refer to hits, they're usually referring to either page views or unique visitors. And I try not to be a jerk about it, but I tend to be corrective. You're not really talking about hits, you're talking about page views or unique visitors. And I think to really start to look at, are you interested in looking at page views? Is the volume of page views the most important thing to you? Or is it the number of unique eyeballs or prospective eyeballs that might come to your website? And that's really the important thing. Once you start to look at what your goals are for your website, whether it is to get eyeballs on your content or whether it is to drive leads, that really makes the biggest difference in terms of what data point to look at with analytics and how you interpret it. So I think before you even start to look at your data, think about what your ultimate goal is and what you're trying to do with your blog. Is it a content-based site where maybe you're going to sell advertising or whatever, or if you're really using your blog to run a business and to get butts and seats and to get people to actually, hire you. If it's a lead generation blog, then you're going to have way different metrics and goals for your website than if you're going to do a content-driven blog.
Let me dive into that a little bit then. So just because historically what I've looked at has just been, of course, the number of visitors, number of page views, and like you said, just standard what comes out of the box, once you put your JavaScript code in. And recently, actually just yesterday, I put a pop-up on my site where, after you've been there for 15 seconds or so, a video pops up of me and it says, hey, welcome to my site. Over here you can find this, over here you can find that, and you can also, sign up for my book down below. So it's more lead generation so I can create a list. What metrics should I be looking at that are different? Because you mentioned kind of two different things you could do, and there's probably several. One is kind of people visiting your site, another is lead generation. So as I'm using this now in the last few days for more lead generation, how should I be looking at my stats different?
Absolutely. Like when you're looking for at lead generation, your goal is conversions. And so you want to set up conversion goals. If you're using Google Analytics, this is something you can do with whatever tool you're using, whether it's Google, whether it's Woopra. If you want to really measure the outcomes of the work that you're doing, you want to set up a conversion goal. And a conversion goal is going to be different depending on what your website does. For you, for what you want to do, Rick, it would be how many people sign up for your website. And you can actually set up a conversion goal as an event, as an Ajax event, and start to measure how many people click through and then sign up for your newsletter through your website. And so conversions is really the name of the game for you. You'd still want to look at page views because that's important, but at the end of the day, like your main outcome is to look at how many people sign up for that newsletter. And even more than that, how many people who sign up for that newsletter then give you a call or email you and then, sign up for whatever consulting services you do. That's the harder thing to measure, and Google Analytics or any web analytics tool won't do that out of the box. But that's where a tool like Excel comes in, where you can start to measure those offline outcomes and connect them to the online goals that you have and see what the correlation is.
So, so thinking about analytics in a general sense, so we always have people who ask me, what kind of metrics should I put on my dashboard? And my usual answer is I don't know because it depends on your situation. So could you speak to sort of how do you get clients, the people you're training, to think about when they're creating a dashboard, or if they have a dashboard, in this case a web analytics dashboard, but really analytics is analytics, right? So when you're creating a dashboard, say in Excel or anything else, or you're just coming up with it in your head, how do you decide metrics and KPIs? How do you decide what's important?
That's where you really tie back into whatever the business is, whatever their business goals are. And you're absolutely right. My answer tends to be when somebody says, what are the best metrics for me? Well, it depends. What is your business? What are you trying to is it sales? If it's direct sales? If it's a nonprofit, is it donations or the number of volunteers that show up for an event? You really have to take a step back from the metrics themselves within digital and look at the overall business goals and say, regardless of whether it's online or offline, what are you trying to get people to do? And then from there, what digital metrics would help to best measure what you're trying to get people to do? So it's one of the hardest things that I have found with analytics is to get people to not focus so much on the metrics themselves and to focus on the overall business goals that the metrics can help them, determine the outcomes of. And it's hard to do that because especially with a tool like Google Analytics that is plug and play, you get all this data, it's pretty, it's attractive, you see charts and you go, this means something. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean something if you don't have a goal that you're trying to measure. So really getting people to take usually a step one or two steps back than they're comfortable with and say, what are your business goals? What are you trying to get people to do in general for your business? Like what determines success? Okay, then what on the website determines that you've succeeded in reaching those business goals? And in some cases with digital, that question has never been asked. It's like, we have a website because we have a website, not we have a website because we're trying to, you know, drive traffic. We're trying to do this for lead generation. And so that, one of the biggest things that comes with the work that I do is to get people to start to look at digital as a way to achieve their business goals. Because in many cases, businesses don't think about that. Their digital presence is there because it's there, not to fulfill any specific goals.
So it sounds like perspective, because digging into data, looking at numbers, making charts and calculations, and looking this way and that way, it can be fun, but what is it helping? And are you not going to a networking meeting while you're fiddling with data? Are you not doing something that you really could do to drive your business while you're looking at data?
Yeah. I think that it especially now with digital in particular, but I think in general, there's so many tools now. Especially when I first started doing this, I had to beg people to pay attention to what the insights that I had. It was pre-Google Analytics. It was AW Stats, which was log file analysis and not nearly as pretty. And I would come up with the little dashboards and I would chase after people with them and they'd be like, that's great. And they'd throw it away or not pay attention. Google Analytics came on the scene and it made data sexy, digital data sexy. And now everybody's kind of clamoring for it, but the hardest part of it is to start thinking about, like, how can we not go down the rabbit hole with this? How can we get this to answer questions? But in many cases, the data is looked at before the questions are asked. And I think the role of analytics, of web analysts, is to ask the questions and to ask them again and to ask them 3 or 4 more times, even beyond the point of it being interesting or sexy for people, but to continue to say, what are the goals and how can we achieve them? And before we even get to selecting metrics, I think and I've kind of gone off the rails a little bit to get into this point, but with blogs, I feel like you have some metrics. One of the things I like to say for blogs in particular is that you can look at unique visitors and you can look at page views, and that's awesome. But when you start to look at them along with bounce rate, then you start to get insights, because I've seen this so many times where people say, this blog post has gotten this many page views and it's really doing well. Okay, you know, the piece of content that's gotten the most page views for the month has a 98% bounce rate. So that means that people saw it and then left immediately. But what about the content that's bringing in maybe not as much traffic, but has a lower bounce rate and is getting people to stick around? And maybe then you start to look at more people are looking at this piece of content and then going to another piece of content and another piece of content. And they're staying on your website longer based on this keyword or this piece of content. And those are the insights that kind of help you start to create a strategy, as opposed to these many people came and looked. Right. And that's when you start to contextualize this data a little bit more and not do it just kind of, and it's easy to get sucked into the ego boost, especially with blogs. You go, oh, this went viral, it's awesome. Yeah, it might have gone viral. It might be, a one-time thing, not necessarily something that you can build an audience with and build a client base with. So to get beyond the ego boost.
That's something I did for a while. Maybe I need to start looking at it again based on what you said. Is instead of looking at the number of visitors that come to the site, I started looking at non-bounce visitors, and I started to see how those would trend. Because I thought that was giving me a lot more insight on just how engaging the content was.
So I'm a huge fan of bounce rate. I feel like that's where you can start to look at your dedicated visitors, the people who want to stick around a little bit more. It's my favorite metric.
Yeah. So going to this idea, because this idea that when you look at data for you just look at it and you're like, oh, this is pretty. So before Google Analytics, there was AW Stat. So I kind of feel this is sort of how I feel about the Power BI tools right now, especially that Excel map function that's part of it. So it has this like 3D world and it makes bar charts come out. And I've seen a lot of people say, hey, look at all this insight. And I look at it and I say, well, it doesn't, I don't see any insight. I see things that look like buildings jumping out.
Right.
And I feel like, you know, you show this to a group of people and they look at it and they're like, whoa, they're thinking of the possibilities without actually analyzing what's in front of them, wondering, you know, what can I gain from this? So, and I see, you obviously see that in your own line of work. People say, oh, we're capturing all these metrics. Well, what do they mean? And you ask that, well, I like page views are high. What do you mean? What does that mean? It means I'm doing really well. But really have to put them in context. And this is really important in terms of any dashboard creation. So that's how I think about it.
So
yeah, you're totally right, Jordan.
To your point of what you said a little bit earlier around, you know, asking questions deeper and deeper, I liken a lot of these things back to kind of Six Sigma. And one of the teachings in Six Sigma is something called a 5 why test, which is, and any analyst should do this, right? And particularly as you're putting together dashboards. And it's as easy as you asking the question why 5 times, right? You know, why did we miss this metric? And then why did that happen? And why did that happen? So you start to actually get down to a root cause driver that you can actually do some change around. And I think that's important. That's kind of the same thing you're saying. You know, don't just take things that's on the surface.
Yeah. Avinash Kashik has been, who I believe he still works for Google. He was like the pre-Justin Petroni Google Analytics guru. But I mean, he was one of the first people to really start to make this make sense. And like Six Sigma was a big part of. If you've read some of his books, he refers to Six Sigma a lot, and I think it's really, you know, saying why, asking why, and questioning beyond the point of comfort for a lot of people is so crucial. And for him, there was an idea of there's something called the analytics life cycle. I think I got the name right. Where you ask the question, you test it. If you test it and you're not getting insights from the question that you're asking, then maybe you're asking the wrong question. And I think that like, especially with analytics, if you ask a question and you don't get insights from it, then it tends to, like, the blame tends to get pointed on either the tool or the analyst as opposed to the question. And I like the idea of going back to the question itself and saying, maybe we're asking something that isn't really what we want to know, and using that as the point of starting to make decisions. Data is really, really interesting because I feel like, especially now, people kind of look at it as this mystical thing, and there's so many different shades of gray in terms of the inquiry process that gets lost. And I like the idea of data being a process of inquiry as opposed to this solid thing that's just done. And when you get the answer, that is the absolute answer, and there's nothing else to ask.
Right. And that reminds me of, you know, when I was an analyst in a company, it was always inquiry, and I was told that an analyst has to be comfortable saying that the data is good as of. But somebody will say in an hour from now, we weren't reporting this thing right over the past 6 months. Now we got to correct it. Or we didn't have this report at all yesterday, so now let's get it in. And you got to be able to say, okay, yes, that was the story an hour ago, but this is the story now. And not apologize for it, but understand it does, data is a beautiful thing in that way.
Yeah. And it's a hard job to be that person, I think, especially now, because it's like, here's our data person, and our data person will tell us everything we need to know. And if you're presented in that way, there's almost an unspoken pressure to like be a wizard as opposed to be the person who asks difficult questions. So.
Yeah, and can stand up when somebody wants to question your data.
Yeah.
Just say, show them what you got.
Yeah.
You know? So since this is Excel TV, so I wonder if we can talk about, so you and I, Keidra, we connected because of the Excel Google Analytics relationship. So Why aren't you a Google Analytics person who says, okay, it's all there in Google? Why Excel?
There are limits to what Google Analytics can do when it really comes to providing context outside of the world of digital. And one of the things that I became more of an Excel fan because of the Excel Google Analytics add-ins and plugins for Excel that you can start to import the data from the API and then really start to look at it beyond, either month over month or, start to do pivot tables with the different types of dimensions. And you can really start to do things that, while you can kind of do pivots in Google Analytics, you can't do them on the same level that you can with Excel. And you can really start to look at trends in a really nuanced way with those plugins that you can't do alone. So that's why, and when I was hardcore doing web analytics, when I was doing nothing but web analytics and not any kind of other kinds of digital strategy, it was like 80-20 time in Excel versus time actually in Google Analytics.
Wow.
I spent almost all of my time looking at the data in Excel to get actual trend insights as opposed to looking at Google Analytics and doing kind of a drive-by glance of what went on for that one slice of time. So that's why I think it's important.
And what's an example?
I think a great example would be when you start to look at year-over-year data for a particular slice of audience, especially a customized slice. If you're starting to look at filters, you start to look at filtered data, and you want to look at, say, Facebook data and compare year-over-year trends for keywords on Facebook. You can't, like those different dimensions, you can't necessarily look at the data within the Google Analytics dashboard interface and start to see the comparison year over year in terms of what keywords are bringing conversions. But if you take that data out and spit it into Google Analytics and start to do pivot tables, you can start to look at or pivot charts, you can start to see it visualizes the data a lot better in Excel than it would in Google. And you start to really see it in a way that Google can't necessarily show it to you in the charts. So that's, and then also you can get like just the way that you can slice the data and export it within Google Analytics is something that just the way that the dashboard is currently set up just kind of cuts you off. And you can do bigger chunks and smaller chunks and start to really see it and play with the charts a little bit more in terms of visualizing it in a way that you have more control.
Right.
So Keidra, you said that you're a digital strategist. I want to dive into that a little bit, and first off, understand what you mean by that, and if what you mean by that is kind of something larger than just the Google Analytics, and then I know of a brand new YouTube channel, Excel TV, that really doesn't have a web presence, but we have a struggling Facebook page with 40-something people or so, mostly friends and family. We have about 39 people in a LinkedIn group, and we have a few 50 or so Twitter followers, and so we're just kind of just beginning here. What sort of a strategy? What sort of things should we be doing differently than we're doing right now?
That's hard to say part of digital strategy overall is to start to look at not just social, not just web, not just email, but all of them together and how they create a presence for you, and how they're connected. So part of my role as a digital strategist is to say, maybe social isn't the way to get your audience. Maybe it's SEO. Maybe you boost your organic search traffic, and then especially with YouTube. YouTube is fantastic for SEO, more so than say Vimeo, which is not so. better looking, but not so good for SEO because you don't have the power of Google behind you. It's the role of digital strategy is to say you have all these tools at your disposal. What's the best way to get your audience and get your audience to come and do what you need to do? So, I mean, for Excel TV, I would say, social is good, but social has its limits, especially now. Facebook is making it harder for you to do, you can't get the kind of organic audience traffic now that you could have with Facebook 7 years ago or 8 years ago or even 4 years ago, because they're really pushing the algorithm now so that you kind of have to buy advertising in order to get that traffic. But with this, where people are looking for Excel information and they're looking for resources and data, maybe it's SEO is the way to go. So it's more of an issue of coming up with a really robust keyword strategy and just making sure that everything is tagged for your Google Analytics or for your YouTube channel to get that audience that would be looking for this information. So it really comes down to where's your audience, how will your audience best find you, and how can you get them to you? For some companies, it's social. For some companies, it's SEO, and for others, it might be pay-per-click, PPC. So it's really looking at all those different strategies and saying which one is the best for my company.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.